Emma Williams was a woman who lived two different lives. In one life, she was the strong and brilliant CEO of a growing company, a leader who made big decisions every day. People admired her confidence, her discipline, and her success. She was the woman who always wore the perfect suit, spoke with certainty, and walked into a room like she owned it. Her name appeared in magazines, and her company was respected by partners and clients all over the city. But in her other life, the one hidden behind closed doors, she was just a mother carrying a pain she could never show to the world. At home, her sharp eyes often softened with sadness, and her strength felt like it was breaking apart piece by piece. Because no matter how much power she had in her career, there was one thing she could not fix: her daughter's silence. Her little girl, Lily, was 6 years old and beautiful like the first light of morning. She had wide brown eyes, soft curls that always slipped out of her ponytail, and a gentle smile that made strangers adore her. But Lily did not speak, not a single word for years. She had spoken before when she was younger, small words like mama and yes. But after a sudden, painful accident that had shaken both their lives, Lily's voice disappeared. Doctors had said it was not physical. Her body was healthy. It was her heart and mind that had locked her voice away. Emma had taken her to every specialist she could find. She had paid for therapy, for counseling, for every method anyone suggested, but nothing worked. Lily only stayed silent, holding her small stuffed bear wherever she went. The bear was old, with one eye missing and its fur worn out, but Lily would not let it go. It was her comfort, her shield from the world. The CEO, who could stand in front of hundreds of employees and speak with strength, felt helpless when it came to her own daughter. Each night after finishing her long work meetings, Emma would sit by Lily's bed, brushing her hair softly and whispering stories. She would tell her about princesses and adventures, about magical places where little girls laughed without fear. And every night she would hope for a word, even a sound, to break the silence. But Lily would only smile faintly or look away, hiding inside her quiet world. That Saturday morning, Emma woke up with a decision. She would take Lily to the playground. It had been weeks since Lily had played outside with other children. Emma knew the world sometimes looked at her daughter with curious or pitying eyes, and she hated it. But deep inside, she also knew Lily needed to see children running and laughing, to remember what joy sounded like. Emma dressed simply that morning, leaving behind her usual polished suits. Instead, she wore a soft blue blouse and jeans, wanting to look like just another mother, not the CEO everyone recognized. She helped Lily into her favorite yellow dress and tied her curly hair with a ribbon. As always, Lily clutched her bear tightly, her little fingers gripping it as if it were her lifeline. On the way to the playground, Emma drove in silence. The city moved fast around her, cars rushing, people crossing streets, voices on phones. But inside the car, only the hum of the engine filled the air. Emma kept glancing at Lily through the rearview mirror. Her daughter's eyes were fixed on the window, watching trees and buildings pass by, her expression calm but distant. Emma's heart ached. She wished she could reach into that little world, inside Lily, and bring her back. She wanted to hear her laugh again, the way she used to when she was only 2 years old, clapping her hands at the sound of nursery songs. That laughter was now just a memory, a treasure Emma replayed in her mind whenever the silence became too heavy. When they arrived at the playground, children's voices floated through the air like music. The swings squeaked as kids flew back, and forth, slides echoed with happy screams, and parents sat on benches talking while keeping watch. Emma held Lily's hand tightly as they walked inside. Lily stayed close, her eyes scanning the playground, but she didn't run toward the slides, like other kids. She only squeezed her bear tighter and stood by her mother's side. Emma led her to the swing and gently placed her on it. "There you go, sweetheart," she whispered, pushing the swing softly. Lily didn't speak, but she looked at her mother with wide, searching eyes. Emma smiled, though her chest felt heavy. She sat on the swing beside her daughter, moving slowly, back and forth. Around them, children laughed and shouted, chasing each other, sliding and calling out names. Emma noticed how Lily's gaze followed them, curious but cautious. She wanted to join. Emma could feel it, but something inside still held her back. Other parents glanced their way, some smiling politely, others with that look Emma had come to hate. Pity. She lifted her chin, pretending not to notice, but deep inside, she felt the sting. She wanted to shout at them that her daughter was more than her silence. She was bright, she was kind, she was strong. Emma tried to hide her pain, but as she pushed the swing gently, her thoughts grew louder. What if she never speaks again? What if she grows up in silence, never telling me what she feels, never calling me mommy again? The questions tore at her heart, but she kept her face calm, not wanting Lily to sense her sorrow. The CEO, who had built her empire with confidence, now sat on a swing, wishing for just one word from the most important person in her life. And in that moment, as the wind brushed against her hair and Lily's small feet brushed the ground, Emma silently prayed that this day at the playground might change something, that somehow the world might give her daughter's voice back. The playground was full of life that afternoon. Bright sunlight stretched across the grass, making the metal slides shine. The voices of children filled the air, laughter mixing with the squeaks of swings and the sound of sneakers running across the ground. It was the kind of place that usually brought joy to parents and children alike. Emma sat on a wooden bench near the swings, her hands folded tightly in her lap. Her eyes followed Lily, who sat quietly on the swing just a few steps away. The little girl's legs dangled, her shoes brushing lightly against the dirt. Her stuffed bear was pressed firmly against her chest, as though she needed it to protect her from the world around her. Children ran past, chasing each other, calling out names, squealing in excitement. Some climbed the jungle gym, others slid. Down the slide, their voices ringing clear and loud, but Lily remained still, her swing barely moving. Her wide brown eyes followed the other children, but she didn't join them. She simply watched, her small fingers holding on to the bear's worn fabric. Emma's heart tightened. She wanted so badly to see her daughter run and laugh like the others. She longed to hear Lily's voice mixing with the sounds of the playground. But the silence between them felt like an invisible wall, strong and unbreakable. Emma rose from the bench and walked over to her daughter. She knelt down beside the swing, brushing a strand of curly hair away from Lily's face. "Sweetheart, do you want to play on the slide?" she asked gently. Her voice carried warmth, though her chest ached with hope that felt too heavy. Lily looked at the slide where two children were racing each other down. For a moment, her lips parted slightly as if she wanted to say something. But then she looked down, burying her face against her bear. She shook her head slowly. Emma forced a smile even though inside her heart felt heavy. "That's okay," she whispered softly. "We can just sit here for now." She gave the swing a gentle push, and Lily swayed forward and back, her small hands holding tightly to the chains. Her face remained calm, almost distant, as if her thoughts were somewhere far away. Other parents watched quietly from their benches. A few gave Emma kind smiles, but others had that look she despised, curiosity mixed with pity. They noticed Lily's silence, her stillness, and their eyes asked questions they never spoke aloud. Emma lifted her chin, trying to appear strong, but every look reminded her of the weight she carried. Her thoughts returned to the past, to the time before Lily's voice had gone. She remembered afternoons filled with laughter, when Lily would run across the living room, calling for her, her voice sweet and full of life. She remembered bedtime stories where Lily would interrupt with questions or repeat her favorite words over and over just to make her mother laugh. Those memories were sharp now, like glass. They cut her every time she thought of how quickly it had all vanished. Emma sat back down on the bench, watching her daughter carefully. She noticed how Lily's eyes followed a group of kids building something in the sandbox. They were piling sand into a tall tower, their voices filled with excitement as they argued over whether it was a castle or a fort. Lily tilted her head slightly, her expression showing interest. Emma's heart lifted with a small hope. Maybe this was the moment Lily would walk over, sit beside them, and join in silently. Even if she didn't speak, being close to them could help her remember what it felt like to be part of a group. But then one of the children glanced at Lily and whispered something to his friend. The two giggled together, pointing toward her. Emma's chest burned with frustration. She wanted to protect Lily from every careless laugh, every look that made her feel different. Lily, however, only looked down quickly, hugging her bear tighter, as if shrinking into herself. Emma swallowed hard. She stood again and walked back to the swing, crouching in front of her daughter once more. "It's okay," she said softly, stroking Lily's hair. "You don't have to go if you don't want to. Mommy's right here." The little girl leaned forward, resting her forehead against Emma's shoulder for just a second. It wasn't a word, but it was enough to tell. Emma, she understood. Time moved slowly in that playground. Emma watched as other families laughed together, sharing snacks and stories. A father ran behind his daughter, pushing her on the swing until she squealed with joy. A mother clapped her hands as her toddler took wobbly steps in the grass. The sound of it all was warm, lively, full of the kind of life Emma wished for her own child. But she and Lily remained in their quiet world, separated from the rest. Emma felt a mix of sadness and determination. She knew she couldn't give up, not after everything they had been through. Even if the silence continued, she would sit through it with Lily, day after day. She would wait for the moment when her daughter was ready to return. As the sun began to dip lower, the light turned golden, casting long shadows across the playground. Emma held Lily's hand, her thumb brushing over the child's small fingers. She whispered, "One day, sweetheart. One day you'll find your voice again. And when you do, I'll be right here listening." For a brief moment, Lily looked up, her eyes meeting her mother's. There was something soft in her gaze, something that made Emma's heart tremble. It wasn't a word, but it was hope. Quiet, fragile, and alive. And though the playground was filled with noise and laughter all around them, Emma and Lily remained in their own silence, waiting for a change neither of them could yet imagine. The sun had climbed higher in the sky, warming the playground with its golden light. Emma sat on the bench watching Lily's small form on the swing. Her daughter's shoes traced soft lines in the dirt, her stuffed bear tucked tightly against her chest. The sounds of other children echoed around them, bright and full of life, yet the space between Emma and Lily felt quiet, almost fragile. Emma was beginning to wonder if coming here had been a mistake. She had hoped the laughter of other children might encourage Lily to join in, but instead, her daughter only seemed to shrink further into herself. Emma's heart ached with the same helplessness she carried every day. She was about to stand and suggest they leave when she noticed movement near the playground entrance. A tall man walked in, holding the hand of a young boy. The man was broad-shouldered, dressed casually in a plain gray t-shirt and jeans. His presence carried a calm strength, and his deep brown skin seemed to glow beneath the sun. His son, a boy no older than 6, tugged at his hand eagerly, all ready. Smiling at the slides and swings, Emma's eyes followed them without meaning to. She noticed how the boy's laughter rang out, free and easy, and how the father's eyes softened every time he looked at his child. There was no impatience, no distraction, only focus and quiet joy. Something about it made Emma pause. It was Rare to see that kind of attention in the busy world she lived in. The boy, whose name she soon overheard was Jordan, dashed toward the slide, leaving his father standing nearby. The man chuckled and shook his head lightly, then scanned the playground as though making sure his son was safe. His gaze eventually rested on Emma and Lily. Emma tensed slightly. She had grown used to the stares of strangers, the curiosity about her silent daughter. She braced herself for that familiar look of pity, but instead, the man's eyes softened with something different, understanding. It wasn't the kind of look that made her feel small or judged. It was simply kind. He walked toward the swings, stopping a few feet away, close enough to speak, but not so near as to intrude. "Hey there," he said gently, his voice low and calm. "Beautiful day, isn't it?" Emma nodded politely. "Yes, it is." He glanced at Lily, who clung to her. Bare tightly, her eyes darting toward him and then quickly away. "Your daughter?" he asked softly. Emma hesitated for a second before replying. "Yes, her name is Lily." "She's lovely," he said with a warm smile, and then he gestured toward the boy at the slide. "That's my son, Jordan. Well, let's just say he has a lot of energy." Emma allowed herself a small smile, though it didn't quite reach her eyes. "He looks happy?" The man nodded. "He is. Took us a while to get here, though." His tone shifted, carrying a depth that made Emma glance at him curiously. He didn't explain right away, and she didn't ask. There was something about him that felt steady, like he wasn't afraid of silences. Meanwhile, Jordan had noticed Lily on the swing. He ran over with the kind of carefree boldness only children had. "Hi," he said brightly, standing in front of her. "I'm Jordan. Do you want to play?" Lily froze, her wide eyes fixed on him. Her little hands gripped her bear tighter, and her legs shifted nervously. For a moment, Emma thought she might cry or turn away. She leaned forward, ready to step in and gently guide Jordan away. But before she could, the tall man knelt down to his son's level. "Jordan," he said in a soft but firm voice. "Sometimes people need a little more time. Why don't you show her what you're building in the sandbox? Maybe she'll want to watch." Jordan looked at his father and nodded, his smile never fading. "Okay." He turned back to Lily. "I'm going to make the biggest castle ever. You can come if you want." And with that, he ran back toward the sandbox. Emma expected the man to stand and leave, but he stayed crouched at Lily's side. He didn't look at her with pity or force her to respond. Instead, he spoke gently, almost like he was telling a story. "You know," he said softly, "when Jordan was little, he didn't like to play with other kids either. He stayed close to me all the time, but one day, he saw a group of kids building something and he just couldn't resist. He took a small step and then another, and before I knew it, he was laughing louder than all of them." Emma's breath caught. There was no judgment in his words, no suggestion that something was wrong with Lily. It was simply a story, offered like a bridge. To her surprise, Lily was listening. Her wide eyes, usually so distant, were fixed on the man's calm face. She didn't speak, of course, but Emma could see the way her small body leaned forward ever so slightly. Her curiosity stirred. The man noticed, too. He didn't push further. He simply smiled at Lily and stood, giving her space. "Well," he said kindly, looking at Emma, "maybe today's not the day, but you never know what tomorrow brings." Emma swallowed, her throat tight with emotion. She wasn't used to this. Most strangers either ignored them completely or pushed too hard, asking questions that cut into her heart. But this man, this father, had offered understanding without asking for anything in return. As he walked back toward the sandbox, Emma watched Lily. Her daughter's gaze followed Jordan, who was already piling sand into a tall mound, laughing as his small hands worked quickly. And for the first time in a long while, Emma saw something new in Lily's eyes. Not fear, not sadness, just a flicker of interest. Emma's heart gave a small, cautious leap. Perhaps today wasn't the mistake she had feared. Perhaps the unexpected encounter with a stranger and his joyful son was the beginning of something neither she nor Lily could have imagined. The afternoon sun painted the playground in warm colors, wrapping everything in a gentle glow. Children's voices rose and fell like music, their laughter carrying far across the open park. Emma sat quietly on the bench, her eyes fixed on Lily. Her daughter still held her stuffed bear tightly, but something had changed. Her gaze was no longer distant. Instead, she watched the sandbox where Jordan knelt, his small hands digging deep into the sand as he worked on his castle. Emma noticed the flicker of curiosity in Lily's eyes. It was faint, fragile, but real. For years, she had prayed to see such a spark. She felt her heart thump with nervous hope, afraid that if she blinked, the moment might disappear. A few steps away, Marcus, the tall single father, crouched down beside his son. His voice carried softly, calm and warm, as he encouraged Jordan's efforts. "That's a strong wall," he said, pointing to the mound of sand. "If you make it taller, it'll be harder for the waves to knock it down." Jordan grinned proudly and turned, his eyes landing on Lily again. "Do you want to help?" he asked, his voice bright and welcoming. He held up a small plastic shovel, offering it with open hands. Lily froze. Her fingers tightened around her bear, her chest rising and falling faster. She didn't move, didn't speak, but Emma could see her daughter was torn between fear and interest. Emma leaned forward gently. "It's okay, sweetheart," she whispered. "You don't have to if you don't want to. But if you want to watch, that's fine too." Marcus glanced at Emma and gave her a reassuring nod, as if to say there was no rush. He knelt lower in the sand, speaking in that same soothing tone. "You know, castles are stronger when more hands build them. That's what Jordan and I learned. It's not about being fast. It's about building together." Emma watched carefully. He didn't speak to Lily the way most people did. He didn't force her, didn't ask why she was quiet, didn't press her for answers. He simply spoke, as though she was already part of the group. And to Emma's surprise, Lily's eyes didn't turn away. She was still watching. Jordan, full of patience, dug another scoop of sand. "That's okay," he said cheerfully. "I'll build the wall. You can just look. Sometimes looking is important too." Emma felt a rush of emotion. This little boy, without knowing it, had given Lily the gift of freedom. Freedom to be present, without being pressured. Minutes passed like this, soft and unhurried. Lily's swing creaked as she shifted slightly, leaning forward. Her bear was still tucked under her chin, but her body had moved closer, as if her small heart was pulling her toward the sandbox. Emma held her breath, not daring to interrupt. Finally, Lily slid off the swing. Her little shoes touched the dirt, and she stood still for a long moment, clutching her bear. Emma's hands tightened on her knees, afraid to hope too much. Then slowly, Lily took a small step forward. Emma's chest filled with a mix of shock and joy. It wasn't much, just one step, but it was the first step Lily had taken toward other children in a very long time. Marcus noticed too. His eyes softened. And though he didn't say anything, Emma caught the brief smile he gave, a smile that told her he understood how big this moment truly was. Lily stopped a few feet from the sandbox, watching as Jordan carefully shaped the top of the sandcastle. Jordan glanced up and smiled again, waving his hand. "Hi, Lily," he said in a gentle voice this time. "This can be your side of the castle. You don't need to talk if you don't want to. You can just put sand here." He patted the ground beside him. Lily hesitated, her small fingers fidgeting. With her bear. Her lips parted slightly, but no sound came. Still, her feet carried her one more step forward. Emma's throat tightened, and she had to blink quickly to hold back tears. She had spent so long trying to guide Lily, begging for a word, waiting for a change. Yet here, with this kind boy and his calm father, her daughter was moving on her own. Marcus spoke softly again, his voice steady as the afternoon breeze. "You know, when I was a kid, I built castles too. But mine always fell down because I worked alone. Jordan is smarter than me. He says things stay up better when you share the building." Lily's eyes flickered toward Marcus, and for the first time, Emma noticed a faint softness in her daughter's expression. She wasn't afraid of him. She was listening. Emma pressed a hand over her heart. She felt as though she was witnessing something delicate and rare, like watching a flower open after a long winter. Jordan continued to dig, humming to himself as he shaped the sand. He didn't pressure Lily to come closer, but he left a small shovel in the sand near where she stood, waiting patiently as though it already belonged to her. The playground around them carried on. Children ran, slides squeaked, parents chatted, but for Emma, the world had narrowed to this one fragile moment. She leaned back slightly, giving Lily space, her eyes misting. For years she had prayed for a sign, for even the smallest change. And now, in the presence of a kind stranger and his open-hearted son, she was seeing it. Lily bent down slowly, her tiny hand reaching for the small shovel. She picked it up carefully, almost as if testing whether it was truly allowed. Jordan's face lit up. "Yay! You can help make the tower stronger," he said happily. Lily didn't respond with words, but she placed the shovel into the sand and gave the smallest scoop. Her hand shook, but she did it. Emma covered her mouth, tears slipping down her cheeks. Marcus looked at Emma then, his expression quiet but knowing. He didn't need to say anything. His eyes said it all. This is a beginning. For the first time in years, Emma's heart felt something more than fear. She felt hope, soft, fragile, and alive. The castle was almost complete. The sun hung lower in the sky now, painting the playground with a soft golden glow. Shadows stretched long across the ground, and the air had cooled just enough to feel gentle on the skin. Jordan clapped his sandy, hands together, grinning proudly at the tall structure rising from the sandbox. "It's the strongest castle ever," he declared, his voice filled with excitement. "Nothing can break it." Beside him, Lily sat quietly. The small shovel rested. In her lap, her stuffed bear still tucked under one arm. She hadn't spoken, but she had helped, placing little scoops of sand where Jordan pointed, pressing gently at the walls when he asked. For most children, such simple actions would mean little. But for Emma, watching from the bench only a few feet away, it felt like the earth itself had shifted. Her daughter was participating. She was listening. She was moving closer to the world again. Emma brushed at her eyes quickly, afraid her tears would spill too fast. She didn't want Lily to notice and feel pressure. This moment wasn't about Emma's emotions. It was about her daughter's courage. Still, she couldn't stop her heart from swelling with a hope so strong it almost hurt. Marcus knelt on the other side of the sandbox, his calm presence steady as ever. He didn't push Lily, didn't shower her with too much praise. He simply treated her like she belonged there, as if her silence was not a wall but just another shade of her personality. Emma admired him silently. For years, she had carried the weight of being Lily's protector alone. And now, here was this man she barely knew, helping without even realizing how much it meant. Jordan turned toward Lily again, his smile bright. "Do you want to make a tower?" he asked. "Every castle needs a tower. You can put it right here." He patted the top of the sandy wall. Lily's eyes followed his hand. She gripped the shovel again, slowly scooping a small pile of sand and patting it down gently. The tower was tiny, uneven, and crumbled a little at the side, but Jordan clapped his hands anyway. "That's perfect," he said proudly. It's the Princess Tower. Every castle needs one of those. Emma gasped softly, her chest tightening. Lily's small shoulders shook, and for a moment Emma thought her daughter might retreat again into silence. But then something unexpected happened. A sound. It was faint, barely more than a whisper, but Emma's ears caught it instantly. Lily's lips had parted, and a soft word slipped out, trembling but clear enough. Castle. Emma froze. The world around her seemed to disappear. The squeaks of the swings, the laughter of other children, even the hum of cars on the nearby street. All she could hear was that single word echoing in her heart. Her daughter had spoken. For the first time in years, Lily's voice had broken through the silence. Emma's hand flew to her mouth, her eyes flooding with tears. She wanted to run to her daughter, to hold her and weep with joy, but she stopped herself. This was Lily's moment. It had to belong to her, not to her mother's overflowing emotions. Marcus noticed, too. His dark eyes softened, and he gave the smallest nod as though telling Emma not to rush. He understood the fragile beauty of the moment. Jordan's face lit up. He didn't make it dramatic, didn't shout in surprise. He simply smiled wider and said, "Yeah, a castle. You made it so good." His words carried the warmth of acceptance, not astonishment. Lily looked at him carefully, her wide eyes blinking. For a second, Emma saw something she hadn't seen in so long, her daughter's lips curling into the faintest smile. It wasn't big, it wasn't loud, but it was real. Emma's chest ached with joy. She sat still on the bench, tears sliding silently down her cheeks. She whispered under her breath, almost afraid to disturb the air, "Thank you." She didn't know if she was speaking to Marcus, to Jordan, or to the universe itself. Lily pressed her small hands against the sandcastle, patting the side gently. She didn't speak again, but the single word had already changed everything. It was proof that her voice was still there, waiting for the right moment to return. Marcus leaned back slightly, his gaze turning to Emma. His expression was quiet, respectful, but the softness in his eyes told her he understood the weight of what had just happened. Emma nodded once, unable to speak through the lump in her throat. Minutes passed with a strange kind of magic. The three of them, Lily, Jordan, and Marcus, worked together on the castle. Jordan talked cheerfully the whole time, explaining every detail of the fortress they were building. Lily stayed mostly silent, but every so often her lips would part as though words lingered on the edge. Emma didn't push. She didn't beg. She only sat quietly, letting her daughter's new courage bloom at its own pace. As the sun began to dip lower, the playground grew quieter. Some families packed up their things, calling their children home for dinner. Emma knew she would have to leave soon, too, but she didn't want to move. She wanted to freeze this moment forever, the sound of Lily's whispered words still echoing in her ears. When Marcus finally stood brushing the sand from his hands, he called out to his son, "Jordan, time to get going." Jordan pouted but nodded. "Okay, Dad." He turned back to Lily. "Bye, Lily. Maybe we can play again next time." To Emma's shock, Lily looked up at him. Her lips moved, and though no sound came this time, the shape of the word was clear. She mouthed, "Bye." Emma's heart nearly burst. Marcus gave Emma a gentle nod as he placed a hand on his son's shoulder. "Take care," he said softly. His tone wasn't heavy, wasn't filled with pity. It was just kind. Emma nodded back, her voice finally returning in a shaky whisper. "Thank you." And as they walked away, Emma sat still for a long time, her hands trembling in her lap. She turned to her daughter, who was hugging her bear tightly, her eyes calm but no longer distant. Emma leaned close and kissed the top of her daughter's curls. Her voice was filled with tears as she whispered, "You spoke, sweetheart. You really spoke." For the first time in years, Emma believed with all her heart that her little girl's voice was coming back. The night air carried a different weight now. The flashing lights still glowed against the houses, but their harshness seemed dim compared to the warmth rising from the gathered crowd. What had begun as suspicion and tension had turned into something unexpected: respect, reflection, and a quiet sense of shame for those who had judged too quickly. David stood calmly, his cane steady beneath his hand, his figure tall despite the weariness in his body. The officers had stepped back, no longer commanding the scene, but looking uncertain, almost lost. The crowd pressed closer, not with hostility, but with admiration. Eyes that had once been filled with worry or doubt now looked at David with gratitude and awe. A woman in the front, her hands trembling as she held her phone, lowered it at last. She wiped a tear from her cheek and whispered, "You carried this all alone, all this time?" David turned his gaze toward her. His voice was gentle, carrying both sorrow and strength. "Some things are too heavy to share. Some memories are easier kept quiet." He paused, his eyes drifting toward the horizon as if seeing shadows of the past. "But silence can heal too, if you learn how to carry it." The crowd listened in silence. Even the children who stood with wide eyes seemed to sense the gravity of his words. The younger officer, guilt heavy on his face, finally spoke. "We didn't know. We thought—" His voice cracked and he stopped himself. He had no excuse, and he knew it. David turned to him, his eyes steady but not harsh. "That's the danger of thinking before knowing. Everyone has a story. Everyone carries scars you cannot see." His words were not shouted, yet they struck like thunder. The taller officer looked down at the ground, his jaw tight. He opened his mouth as if to argue, then stopped. For the first time that night, he felt small, not because of the crowd, not because of the badge he had seen, but because he realized how quickly he had judged a man who deserved more than suspicion. From the back of the crowd, the elderly man on the porch spoke again, his voice rough but strong. "He's not just a soldier. He's a survivor. And he's teaching you all something right now. You better listen." The silence that followed was powerful. It was the kind of silence that wasn't empty, but full of reflection, of respect, of unspoken apologies. A teenager stepped forward nervously, still holding his phone. His voice cracked as he spoke. "Sir, my uncle served too. He came back, but he wasn't the same. He couldn't talk about it. But seeing you, standing here, calm, it makes me think maybe he was stronger than I realized." David's eyes softened. He placed a hand gently on the boy's shoulder. "Your uncle carried battles long after they ended. That takes strength too. Never doubt that." The boy nodded, tears shining in his eyes. The crowd's mood shifted further. No longer tense but united. Neighbors who had barely spoken before exchanged glances, their hearts moved by the moment they were all sharing. They weren't just witnesses anymore. They were participants in a lesson, one they would carry with them long after the night ended. David adjusted his cane and looked back at the officers. "You see," he said quietly, "respect isn't about medals. It isn't about uniforms. It's about dignity. And every person deserves that, whether they've served or not." The taller officer finally nodded, his face pale but honest. "You're right." The younger one lowered his head, unable to meet David's eyes. The old man chuckled softly from the porch. "Took you long enough to figure it out." The crowd laughed gently, breaking the tension at last. Even David allowed himself a small smile, the first of the night. It wasn't a smile of pride, but of relief, a quiet recognition that maybe, just maybe, the night had brought more healing than harm. A woman stepped forward, clutching a small American flag pin on her jacket. She took it off and pressed it into David's hand. You remind us why freedom matters, she said softly. Thank you. David looked at the pin, then at the woman. Thank you, he replied. His voice carried gratitude, but also humility. He never sought recognition, only understanding. The crowd applauded again, not loudly, but warmly. It was the kind of applause that carried respect, not spectacle. As the officers stepped back toward their cruiser, one of them turned once more. Mr. Miller, if you ever need anything at all... But his voice trailed off, unsure how to finish. David simply nodded. Treat the next man you stop with dignity. That will be enough. Those words lingered in the air long after the cruiser's lights dimmed and the car pulled away. The crowd remained, though. People gathered closer around David, asking small questions, offering thanks, sharing their own stories of loved ones who had served or lost or carried invisible wounds. The night became less about the stop and more about connection. Neighbors who had lived side by side for years but had never truly spoken now finding common ground in shared respect. David listened to them all, his heart heavy, but also lighter than it had been in years. For so long he had carried his story quietly, hidden beneath silence and routine. But tonight, without meaning to, he had opened a door. And through it, others had found healing too. The boy with the phone finally put it away and smiled. I don't think I'll ever forget this night. David smiled faintly, his eyes tired but kind. Neither will I. As the crowd began to thin, people walking back to their homes with new thoughts in their hearts, David stood under the dim streetlight, his figure outlined in soft yellow glow. The silence of the street had returned, but it was no longer heavy. It was peaceful. For the first time in a long time, David felt that his silence had spoken, not just for him, but for everyone who had ever carried a hidden story. And in that silence, there was healing. The morning sun rose slowly over the quiet neighborhood, casting a soft golden light on the streets that had been tense only hours before. The flashing lights and harsh sirens were gone, replaced by birdsong and the distant hum of traffic. The world had returned to its calm rhythm. But for those who had witnessed the events of the night, nothing would ever be quite the same. David stepped out of his small house, the door creaking slightly behind him. His cane tapped softly on the pavement as he walked toward his old sedan now parked in the driveway. The car had survived the night unscathed, but its role in the evening's drama would never be forgotten. Neighbors who had gathered outside the night before now gave him nods and small waves, a quiet acknowledgement that carried more meaning than words. Children peered from windows, still curious, still impressed, but also smiling now, relieved that the tension had dissolved. David paused for a moment, looking at the street where the officers had stopped him. The scene had changed. No longer a site of harassment, but a place where lessons had been learned and respect had been earned. He felt the weight of the night still lingering on his shoulders, but it was a lighter weight now. There was a sense of closure and even a spark of hope. Inside his wallet, the small badge remained safely tucked away. It was not for show, and David did not intend it to be. It was a reminder, a quiet symbol of the past, of battles fought and lives saved. But more importantly, it was a reminder of the value of patience, dignity, and courage, traits that no metal could truly measure. Across the street, the elderly man who had spoken up the night before leaned on his porch rail and nodded to David. "You handled that well, son," he said, his voice warm. "Better than I could have." David offered a small, respectful nod. "We all carry stories," he replied. "Some are visible, some hidden. But how we carry them matters." The neighbors listened, absorbing his words. They felt the truth. In them, the story of David Miller, a man quietly bearing the weight of service, sacrifice, and patience had transformed their understanding of bravery and humanity. As David walked back into his home, he thought of the officers who had stopped him. He did not harbor anger toward them. They had acted out of fear and misunderstanding, and now they knew better. The lesson they had learned, though difficult, might shape the way they treated others for years to come. Inside his modest living room, David sat in his favorite chair and looked around at the photographs on the wall. Pictures of his family, some lost, some living far away, and images from his time in service. They reminded him of the journey he had walked, of the sacrifices he had made, and of the strength required to carry the quiet burdens of a life less ordinary. He picked up a framed photo from the table, a picture of a fellow soldier, smiling, holding a small child they had saved during a mission overseas. Memories rushed back, vivid and intense, but this time they were tempered with peace. He had survived the past, and he was here, standing in the light of a new day. A soft knock at the door broke his thoughts. David set down the photo and walked to answer it. A young woman from the street stood there, holding a small notebook. "Sir," she said nervously, "I wanted to say thank you for last night, for your courage, for showing us all what respect and patience look like." David smiled faintly. "Thank you," he said. "But courage isn't about being brave in front of others. It's about doing what's right, even when no one is watching." The woman nodded, inspired. "I'll remember that." As she left, David returned to the window, watching as life slowly returned to the street. Children played on the sidewalks, neighbors chatted, and the hum of daily life resumed. Yet, beneath it all, the memory of the night's events lingered. A story that had brought lessons, reflection, and healing to many. He thought of the crowd, the whispers, the moment when his past had been revealed. The surprise, the awe, the realization of his life and sacrifices. It was a moment that could not be erased, but David had carried it quietly, with dignity, allowing others to learn from it without seeking fame or recognition. In that moment, he understood something vital. Life's true victories were not measured in medals or accolades, but in the impact one left on the hearts of others. One quiet act of patience, one calm stand in the face of misunderstanding, could ripple outward in ways unimaginable. He looked at his reflection in the window. The man staring back was not defined by the judgment of others, nor by the uniform he once wore. He was defined by the choices he had made, the lives he had touched, and the lessons he had silently taught. Later that day, David walked to the small corner store. As he passed neighbors, people smiled, waved, and greeted him warmly. Some stopped to shake his hand, expressing gratitude. He accepted their thanks quietly, with humility. He did not need recognition. He only needed the knowledge that respect had been restored, that hearts had been opened, and that lessons had been learned. By evening, he returned home, closing the door behind him with a sense of calm fulfillment. The street was quiet now, the sun setting in a warm glow. He sat in his chair once again, taking a deep breath. Life had moved forward. People had changed, even in small ways, and he had been part of that change. David reached for the small badge in his wallet. He held it gently, thinking of all the battles, both visible and hidden, that he had faced. The night of misunderstanding and harassment was behind him, replaced with understanding, respect, and hope. He placed the badge on the table next to the framed photo, not as a display of pride, but as a quiet reminder, a reminder that dignity, patience, and courage could shine brighter than any spotlight, medal, or recognition. And as the stars began to appear in the sky above, David Miller, the quiet man who had once faced judgment and suspicion, finally allowed himself to feel the deep peace of a life that had endured, survived, and now, at last, could begin anew. The street would remember him. The crowd would remember him. and the lessons of that night would ripple outward for years to come, carried by those who had witnessed a simple, powerful truth: that true strength is quiet, unwavering, and compassionate. David leaned back in his chair, closing his eyes. For the first time in a long time, he smiled fully, knowing that the journey of healing, understanding, and a new beginning had truly begun.